560theanswer.com.
Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and you have the first Republican member of the House to call for President Trump's impeachment. He's Justin Amash from Michigan. And he's sort of a special category of libertarian-ish Republican congressman. My principal conclusions: Attorney General Barr deliberately misrepresented the Mueller's report. President Trump engaged in impeachable conduct. Partisanship has eroded our systems of checks and balances. Few members of Congress have read the report. Well, it's an interesting position, I guess, but it sort of presupposes that Mueller didn't read the report, doesn't it? Is it Justin Amash's argument that Mueller succumbed to partisan pressure? Because the conclusion that he draws is not the one that Mueller did. And how far afield is Justin Amash? Well, Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader, was on with Maria Bartiromo over the weekend on Fox Business. He had this to say about Amash's tweet.
President Trump has responded to this, and the president tweeted right after Amash tweeted, and he says, "Never a fan of Justin Amash, a total lightweight who opposes me and some of our great Republican ideas and policies just for the sake of getting his name out there through controversy." What's happening, sir?
Well, apparently, those who know Justin Amash, this is exactly what he wants. He wants to have attention. Now, you've got to understand Justin Amash. He's been in Congress quite some time. I think he's only ever asked one question in all the committees that he's been in. He votes more with Nancy Pelosi than he ever votes with me. It's a question whether he's even in our Republican conference as a whole. What he wants is attention in this process. He's not a criminal attorney. He's never met Mueller. He's never met Barr. And now he's coming forward with this because this is what he wants. He wants a Sunday show to put his name forward with a question. It's really disturbing because when you watch on the floor, you could have a bill with 400 votes all supporting it. There'll always be one opposed, and that'll be Justin Amash.
In fact, it's something that even frequent Trump critic Mitt Romney isn't willing to say. He made his senatorial debut on a Sunday talkie with Jake Tapper on CNN and saying this about Amash, but also about impeachment.
My own view is that Justin Amash has reached a different conclusion than I have. I respect him. I think it's a courageous statement. But I believe that to make a case for obstruction of justice, you just don't have the elements that are evidenced in this document. And I also believe that an impeachment call is not only something that relates to the law, but also considers practicality and politics. And the American people just aren't there. And I think those that are considering impeachment have to look also at the jury, which would be the Senate. The Senate is certainly not there either.
Well, the good news is Mitt Romney's doing a lot better job of reading the mood of the electorate than he did as a candidate for president in 2012. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. He has got a new book out, A Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour of Arlington National Cemetery, which we want to talk to him about as well. Senator Cotton, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me on, and thanks for your interest in Sacred Duty.
And by the way, I was with your friend Trey Gowdy on Friday night. He came in for a talk at a pro-life dinner, and he suggested, somebody asked him about 2024, who are the up-and-comers. Of course, he mentioned a couple of his fellow state mates, Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, but he also said Tom Cotton maybe in 2024. Is there any announcement you'd like to make this morning to start us off?
Well, that's very kind of Trey. You know, Trey was one of 4 members of Congress who attended my wedding dinner back in 2014. So we've been close for a long time. But it sounds like he's causing trouble for me.
Well, he's got plans for you.
Yeah, maybe so. But right now, 1, I've got a re-election in Arkansas, and 2, I want to tell the story of the Old Guard of Arlington as I do in Sacred Duty.
But before we get to that, I wanted to get your reaction to some of the bluster over the weekend between Amash and McCarthy, and then Mitt Romney weighing in as well. Is the House and Senate, do you think they're largely unified around President Trump, particularly as it pertains to the impeachment talk?
Well, I heard the exchange that Kevin McCarthy had about Justin Amash. I don't think those guys are going to be on each other's Christmas cards list this year.
No.
Look, I will say that the Mueller report was very clear. There was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. As a matter of fact, the only collusion between a political campaign and party and foreign intelligence operatives was between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. We know that they used Christopher Steele, a former British spy, to collect false allegations against Donald Trump, many of which probably came from Russian intelligence sources. And the Mueller report was also pretty clear on obstruction, and it's just common sense, guys, that the president is not going to obstruct an investigation into something that didn't happen in the first place.
You know, there was an interesting exchange over the weekend as well. Former general counsel for the FBI, James Baker, was on with Chuck Todd, and he was asked about the use of the Steele dossier, and he suggested that that he was skeptical about it. That it was used in the FISA application, of course, for the Carter Page surveillance. But he also said that, probably, it's his view, probably that they would have got the application approved by the FISA court without the dossier, which, of course, demands the follow-up question that Chuck Todd didn't ask. Well, if you didn't need it, then why'd you include it?
I think that's the right question to ask. I'm confident that Attorney General Barr is going to be asking those questions through John Durham, the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, who's handled multiple cases in the past of alleged misconduct by government officials. So I think it's important that we get to the bottom of exactly what happened in 2016 and how it came about that we had extensive surveillance of the then in power administration against its political opponents. As Attorney General Barr said, we don't know all the facts. We don't know if that was appropriate or not. But as he just mentioned late last week, he's been in office now for a few months, and he probably has more questions now than he did when he started.
Do you think President Trump's doing enough to, try to tell Russia not to interfere in our 2020 election?
Amy, I think it's not just not interfering in our 2020 election, but to stop all of their actions that are undermining U.S. interests. Mike Pompeo was in Russia last week meeting with Vladimir Putin. He said not only that we're not going to tolerate any interference in our democratic debates in our election, but we're not going to tolerate the Russian interference in Venezuela in our own hemisphere or what they're doing to help support Iran or undermining our allies in Europe. This administration has been much tougher on Russia from the earliest days than the Obama administration ever was.
You mentioned you're up for re-election along with President Trump, along with many members of the House, and then, of course, trying to make progress back to the majority in the House. And this interesting piece in Politico about Republican women over the weekend, and I just wonder what the conversation is, at least in general terms, among Republican senators, members of Congress, along with the president. In Michigan, 74% of Republican men support Trump. Only 59% of Republican women say they're going to vote to keep him in the White House next year. Now, of course, that can change, and there'll be regression to the mean as Republicans come home when the Democrat Socialists choose their nominee. But is there concern about Republican women leaving the Republican Party like they did in so many House races in 2018?
We do have those concerns, Dan. As you say, you can see the numbers in 2018, but that's why they have campaigns. Ultimately, as you mentioned, the Democrats will nominate someone, maybe a socialist. They have multiple socialists running for president. And then it'll be a choice between the president and whomever the Democrats nominate. And that'll be a campaign on the issues. And I think we're on pretty strong ground on which to run. You have a booming economy that has record low unemployment, that has wages increasing for blue-collar workers for the first time in a very long time. Our military is much stronger than it has been at any time since I've been in public life. We're working to secure our border. We've got a lot of problems there, but the Democrats are partly responsible because they're not doing anything to try to address the immediate crisis. We're working on some other issues as well, like trying to keep down the cost of prescription drugs, or give people more choice about their health insurance for as long as Obamacare is still on the books. So I think we have a very good record on which we can run, Dan. But that's why we have campaigns. You got to run the campaigns to see what's going to happen on Election Day. You don't govern by polls 18 months out.
And besides running up for re-election, you've got a new book out, A Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. Why did you write Sacred Duty?
Amy, something that I noted that was unusual to me, even though I served at the old guard, I served at Arlington National Cemetery, I described in Sacred Duty, but in the last 6 years that I've been in public life, when our Kansans come to visit me, as they do by the thousands every year, a lot of them stay to see the sights. And their favorite site, when I ask them about it, is Arlington National Cemetery. To see those young soldiers guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier, to walk among the headstones and read the stories of heroes, just makes an impression in them, like serving in Arlington made for me. And the way we honor our fallen heroes, I think, says a lot about who we are as a nation and what we hold dear. There'd never really been a good story about those young soldiers that performed those missions in Arlington, and I wanted to tell their story.
Yeah, well, give us a sense of what it's like to be a member of the Old Guard, what the responsibilities are, and what it's like to be present and have those responsibilities to bury someone who sacrificed their life for this country.
It's a very intense job, Dan. It's one of the busiest jobs I had while I was in the Army, and I was in Iraq and Afghanistan both. But the Old Guard is performing dozens and dozens of funerals and ceremonies every single day. As I write in Sacred Duty, in Arlington alone, the Old Guard can perform 20 to 30 funerals every day. But as we learned from our very first days at the cemetery, every funeral is unique. It is a once-in-a-lifetime moment that has been a lifetime in the making. And we approached our funerals with that ethos of excellence, always striving for perfection, because for that family, that is their last moment with the Army, the last moment that they will see their loved ones, comrades, honoring his or her sacrifice to our nation. And that's the kind of poignant memories, as I write in Sacred Duty, that you carry forward with you forever, and that our nation expects from those young soldiers, and that is drilled into them from their very first days there. But pretty soon, the drilling can stop because they internalize that message, and they understand what the Old Guard of Arlington means for our nation.
What was
what kind of, well, no, you can go, because we were just there a few weeks ago, saw, changing of the guard of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and the Lane of the Reef. I mean, it was really just, people were still, tears in their eyes watching this. And what kind of training is involved? Because everyone is so disciplined and so loyal, and there's such a patriotic feeling.
Well, the tomb itself is one of the most specialized units inside the Old Guard. As I describe in Sacred Duty, it can take 9 to 12 months for a new soldier to be fully qualified to guard the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The attrition rate approaches 90% during their training cycle. They only have about 25 to 30 soldiers at a time guarding the tomb, and that's all they do. They perform no other missions. They can spend literally hundreds of hours to make sure their uniform is perfect, and they frequently have to remake their uniform entirely because they're wearing it so much in such adverse conditions. They're training hundreds of hours on their craft and on their technique to ensure that every person who visits the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier gets that perfect image of the changing of the guard. Those are very long hours. Those are very adverse circumstances. But as one tomb guard said to me, these three unknowns didn't just sacrifice their lives, they sacrificed their very identity for our nation. What is it for us to sacrifice a night of sleep or a weekend to make sure that we get everything perfectly for them?
Well, what was your path to the Old Guard?
My path was a little unusual, guys. Normally it's application only. You have to have certain height and weight standards, top physical fitness. You have to be Ranger and Airborne qualified if you're an officer. I didn't apply, though. In Iraq, I got notice that I was being assigned to the Old Guard. It was a surprise to me. I met all those standards. I just hadn't applied. So I called their personnel officer, and they said that they were very short on officers. So they searched the personnel records for everyone who was a lieutenant or captain of infantry, and they chose 6 of us. So at first I thought it might have been because of my superior performance as a platoon leader in Iraq. But I learned that it was actually just because once they'd had the couple hundred of us that fit the criteria, they just chose the 6 tallest ones.
Really?
Well,
hey, height matters.
Yeah, so
we're both tall. Dan and I are like 6 feet.
Yeah, well,
sure.
So a few months later, there were 6 of us. We all just gotten back from Iraq with the 101st Airborne, and one was 6'7", I'm 6'5", and the other 4 are 6'3", and that is very much a decision criteria for the Old Guard, and in particular for the ceremonies that happen at the White House and the Pentagon. The soldiers that perform in those, even though you can be shorter and still be in the regiment, tend to be at least 6'3". A lot of them are 6'5" or above. And we want to project an image when we have a visiting head of state or minister of defense or chief of defense. As I write in Sacred Duty, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis came out on the river entrance one day and talked to some of the soldiers, and he said, "You guys look intimidating. That's good. That's what we're going for."
Well, I'd like to say maybe that could be a campaign slogan: "Vote for Tom Cotton. He's tall." But then you got
he rises above the others.
You got De Blasio, who's tall. You got Comey, who's tall. So it doesn't work across the board. He is Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. Of course, the new book, A Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. Pick it up on Amazon, your local bookstore. Tom, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me on.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer.